that are left behind once we've mined the radioactive ores. Furthermore, the leftover tailings still contain 85% of the radioactivity of the original oil, or rather, the 85% of the radioactivity of the original ore, and it remains dangerous for thousands of years afterwards. Our spent fuel rods remain radioactive, and throughout the process of creating nuclear energy, it produces high-level liquid waste that could produce plutonium for nuclear weapons. So this is a huge security risk for us as well. Furthermore, something that I wasn't aware of that I find rather terrifying, to be honest, is that the U.S. has no permanent waste site, although the first commercial plant went into operation 50 years ago. Furthermore, there are many hidden subsidies, making it difficult to compare the cost of nuclear versus other forms of energy, because we no longer, we've never included the cost of long-term waste disposal. A study from MIT found that nuclear power costs 30 to 50% more than coal or natural gas. And then diving into false clean coal. This was written by Jeff Goodall, who's a contributing editor to the Rolling Stone. And let me see. I lost my place. Give me a second, please. All right. There we go. All right. So the coal industry's slick advertisements promoting clean coal employ 21st century media technology to keep us locked into a 19th century energy economy. This is a classic greenwashing campaign which uses the iconography of sexy technology and down-home Americana to maintain the status quo. Big coal's influence over energy politics. So apparently there's been a $35 million clean coal campaign, which is spearheaded by the coal industry front group, American Coalition for Clean Coal Electricity. The author interviewed a vice president of a coal plant who claims that if coal was not black, they'd be able to sell it better, which was an interesting side statement. He didn't let himself be attributed to that quote. The author also discussed that our logic is that America has a lot of coal, and we're also a technologically advanced society. Therefore, we should be able to clean up coal. The reality, obviously, is not so simple. Mining and burning coal destroys mountains, it poisons our water, it pollutes our air, and it warms our atmosphere. He had a great quote here. Although new coal plants emit less sulfur dioxide than new ones, it's like going from four bottles of whiskey a week down to 3. It does not make you clean and sober. Yeah. Furthermore, costs of other types of fuels, such as solar PV, are plunging. So our electricity grid is slowly catching up to the 21st century. Carbon capture and storage basically means building a new kind of power plant that uses heat and pressure to gasify coal instead of burning it directly. The carbon dioxide is removed and then injected underground into an abandoned gas and oil wells or deep saline aquifers. So it's expensive and inefficient. So basically, there's no way to clean coal. This is not a viable option for our energy future. All right, and to dive into bioenergy, the author is Rachel Smolker, who is the co-director of Biofuel Watch. She says that it's a disaster for biodiversity, health, and human rights. So to sum it up, a new global rush to embrace biofuels for transport, heat, and electricity is a growing threat to ecosystems, wildlife, human health, and the climate. The trend poses the danger of increased commodification of forests, greater competition between food and energy markets, and even more pressure on the world's rural poor that depend on local biomass for their energy needs. So going into the history of biomass, it was one of the first forms of energy. For thousands of years, we've been burning wood or cow dung or peat for heat and for fuel. So it's been interesting now that there's been an unprecedented rush to use this type of energy again. But before we exploit all of our resources, we need to ask where biomass will come from and what the environmental impact of it is. Biomass can be defined very differently from state to state and from country to country. It can include wood and plant materials, animal manures, slaughterhouse remains, solid waste, construction debris, and sometimes even types of tires and plastics. In Brazil, they've really exploited their biomass resources, replacing petroleum fuels with sugarcane ethanol. The U.S. has also, as we've seen, subsidized corn ethanol with generous subsidies. As a result, Brazil has cleared much of the Cerrado savanna ecoregion in creating an industrial sugar monoculture, and it also uses unfair labor practices often when producing that fuel. And the U.S. diversion of food crops into ethanol has been a huge factor in driving up food prices in the recent years. In 2010, nearly 1/3 of corn in the U.S. was converted into ethanol. So when indirect land usage is taken into consideration, biofuels result in more greenhouse gas emissions than petroleum. Often electric utilities have used the expansion of biomass as sort of an easy conversion. So instead of just burning coal plus a mixture of wood chips, rather than choosing to invest in solar or wind options. This is often because wood is readily available in most locations year-round. Biomass has a low energy density. On average, it takes 1.5 tons of wood to generate just a megawatt of energy. Furthermore, biomass plants operate at only 20 to 30% efficiency, meaning that for every 4 trees that are burned, only the energy content of 1 tree is actually retrieved. Furthermore, the smoke from these plants provides a public health hazard as it could contain nitrous oxides, sulfur dioxides, and volatile organic compounds. It produces more carbon dioxide per unit of electricity generated than burning coal or natural gas. The author sort of ended her essay by a reflection of how the vulnerable populations in the global south are impacted by this, as generations before us have depended on biomass, they too now depend on it, and now on top of it they are impacted by unfair labor practices and the pollution that is emitted from our Western plants. So those were the essays that I chose to focus on. Again, I apologize for the rush. It's a very big book, and I hope that you all have an opportunity to read them more in depth. It's definitely worth a read.
There's so much information here. I'm taking Shelley's part. I reread her 2 sections this morning while still at home, and Beth gave me her outline when I got here early today, so I've kind of been quickly. I apologize, Alana, for not listening to all you had to say, but I have read the book several times. I was trying to compact what Shelley has done because there's so much that's repetitive. The 2 sections that we asked Shelley to do, one was depowering destruction, and the other was what we're for. And I find that in the section called Depowering Destruction, there's so much both of us have already said in it. I think I'm going to leave that out because there's still repetitiveness within it and her second section. The title of it, though, you may want to hear it. Well, go online, go to the Post-Carbon Institute, download the chapters that are within it, and you can find some more of the specifics. Because what I'd really like to do is to wrap it up so that we can, if you have comments, I don't think Ilana or I feel like we're experts on the book. So it's not so much that you can ask us questions about the book, it would be more that what questions do we have that are elicited by this information? It's more that, and we can mull that over. So here's the ending of this book, and it's in the title. You know, you give it away with the title just about what we're for, and this might elicit comments from all of us. What is basic energy literacy? You've already heard a lot about basic energy literacy from both of us. Conservation. In Depowering Destruction, Heinberg has a whole chapter on conservation and efficiency. If you use an LED bulb, he says, that just makes people want to use more LED bulbs because we think we're saving energy. So actually, maybe it's not a good idea. What instead is, you don't even need that light. See the difference there? So conservation is very important. Resilience. Resilience requires diversity and redundancy. One of the most vulnerable systems today is transportation, almost completely dependent on affordable fossil fuels. So what are we going to do? You know, electric cars? With increased local self-sufficiency, a community has more ability to adapt and endure. Resiliency, just like sustainability, those are two great big words that have a lot of different types of meanings to all of us. What we are for, eco-localism. Localization increases societal resilience. Basic necessities are produced locally. You know the food movement, the local food movement? That's certainly part of it. Because one of the things it will do, it will reduce transportation, which there's a fossil fuel right there. It will make foods that can be heirloom foods, which might not transport nor sit in a grocery store shelf for very long, but it might be a healthier food, especially healthier than genetically modified. Globalization has maximized so many different things, but mostly, from my point of view, this is one of the things I love to harp on, is for corporate profits and, you know, the exorbitant CEO payouts these days. So a return to more localized economic order is likely or inevitable because of reduced transport fuel. Have any of you read James Howard Kunstler, some of his books? He's a New Englander, and he's written a lot of different things. One of the ones I read recently, which was for the National CCL Book Forum, A World Made by Hand. In other words, going back several centuries instead of using the profligate use of so many things that we use that we've come to depend on. With more localized, more people will become part of truly the democratic process and become part of the decision making. Regional economic organization offers a wide variety of protective, productive, and local jobs. That's one of the things that I wonder about. Why haven't we been able to talk more about, gee whiz, if we changed over to alternative energy, look at all the jobs it would create. And you know, nobody really gets on the bandwagon for that very much. Let's see what's another good one of what we are for. Oh, this continues under localization. Local culture binds together communities. Here's another thing we are for is beauty. Nature produces beauty for free while industrialism destroys it. Biodiversity. You've heard greatest mass extinction. The normal rate of extinction is 1 per million a year species. The rate today is 1,000 times that. Here's the thing I said I couldn't say because I don't tell jokes well, but here's the quote. A UN study determined that business and insurance companies see biodiversity loss as a greater risk than terrorism, which governments spend hundreds of billions of dollars to contain and prevent. And non-human species under biodiversity directly and indirectly benefit us, such as phytoplankton, which has declined 40% since 1950. And it's the base of life in the ocean. And we have 40% less oxygen in the air because of the demise of 40% of phytoplankton. And then finally, and very importantly, is family planning. when I was of childbearing years, I decided not to have kids, because I already knew we were overpopulated. That was, there were other reasons too, but I remember that was one of them. So pretty much that puts it all together, all the different components that we have here. What are you all thinking about? Sure.
Seems to me it all goes back to Walt Kelly's pogo with met the enemy and he is us. we have self-knowledge, observation, borrowing everything good from the old to add to the modicum that we really need of the new, and we're suffering under an energy glut and have been for years. You can't fly across the nation without seeing this eternal patchwork of towns, all lit up because we live in a more criminal society than we would ever admit because of our basic inequities, because we've never grown up in a way that we really...
When I was growing up, I thought everybody told the truth and everybody was good and Congress and the president, you know, all those things, and I discovered the dysfunctionality of us as human beings. Yet at the same time, we have, you can call it this, depending on your perspective, the God-given capability to change, and our initiative and creativity can help us do it.
We have changed immensely without realizing. And I'm in my 80s, and I've noticed, and you can't help noticing over a span of years. In the 1930s, I was wading through slush pits in East Texas, and all these ruined oil fields in many cases. And why my legs haven't gotten bone cancer, I don't know. But anyway. I've seen these changes, and a lot of people have, but we just don't really notice. There isn't a tiny task that we are faced with daily that there isn't an electrical solution for, seemingly now, whether we need it or not, and it was plumped if we need it.
There's so many different ways that all of this touches me when I say that I look at those pictures here, or the one that we showed up there, and it touches me so viscerally. Spanish has been the other language that I speak. My dad was a petroleum engineer for Texaco, and we moved to Venezuela, and I was there 5 years, and that sent me on to languages. I went up through master's and PhD. Well, I became a nurse when I flew through New York and the trade towers fell from overseas. Look at all these things that are part of what is today's reality. We've all touched on them, but I feel my life touched on it so much. So I became a nurse, and I wanted to be a hospice nurse because my dad died when I was young. But the hospital needed an interpreter because Tyson's Chicken is here. And so we have a lot of Central Americans and Mexicans who have come, and Spanish was kind of like a second language to me, not exactly. So I did that, but I'm an RN. Well, now I'm working, when the trade towers fell, I said I want to work closer to home because I've been overseas with the big touring company that I work with, an international touring company. So I want to be closer to home, so that's the reason I became a nurse, so I could work more locally. There's still an 80-mile drive daily. Well, now I have the opportunity to work from home, in my home, as a remote interpreter. I've sat for several national boards so I could become a certified medical interpreter on a national level. Well, now here's where climate change touches me again. You know, the ICE and the detention centers. See, I've been working with both legal and illegal people who are in a hospital because they're sick. And I'll find, it happens, they might tell me that they're legal or illegal because what I do with them is just interpret, I'm just their voice. But now that I'm remotely interpreting, I'm all over the United States. There are detention centers, you know, the big deal on immigration nowadays, and pro or con, whatever. Well, there are these big detention centers, sometimes on the border. If you're from Mexico and you slip across the border, you're sent home directly. If you're from Central America, you may be sent all the way to Port Isabel, which is in Pennsylvania. You stand before a judge eventually, and then you're either credible fear or not, whether you need to seek asylum. Because here are things that are happening, for example, in Central America, which means truly they're happening all over the global south, because the global south is moving to the global north, which is industrialized. Well, here are some of those stories that I hear that I interpret for. Because when a detainee first comes into a detention center, whether it's Port Isabel, along the Texas border or whatever, they have to go through a medical exam. TB is big in a lot of places, and they'll get either TB injections or be treated for TB, but they still might not be carrying it, but it shows up on chest x-rays, so then they have to be put in isolation. So I will work with a doctor, remote interpreting, and we'll ask all this medical history. Well, here's the poignancy of some of these stories where I see what's happening with overpopulation and climate change directly. There was a young woman, 18 years old, with a little tiny girl voice. A lot of Hispanic women, if they've been uneducated, which is so often the case in Central American countries, they may have gone through third grade. And so these little tiny, very shy youngsters. Well, she came here by herself. And she had to catch one of those trains and maybe sit on top of a box car. She was picked up probably at one of the entryways and then sent to Port Isabel, because that's where I was talking to the doctors in Port Isabel, all over in Pennsylvania. And so the question comes around, of all these different physical questions, well, why did you try to come to the United States? You know, this is a nurse or a doctor asking the medical history. And she said with this quavering voice, my mom had diabetes and a heart problem, so I was really hoping to make a difference. So if you want to have an idea of what it's like to live in one of these underdeveloped countries and to go north, that for a lot of people is the thing to do. To go north, because maybe I can make it, or maybe I can get asylum. Well, here was another one. This guy was from Honduras, and the doctor said, well, what are those cuts on your back? He said, well, see, there was this gang that wanted me to become a gang member, and they were making me pay money if I didn't become a gang member. Then they started to beat me up. So I decided to go north. See, that sort of thing is happening in the world. You know, we hear about in Africa, longevity, you know, and the child soldiers. There's a mess going on right now. It's all very poignant, and I think it's partly due to climate change, all of the above, and the profligate economic situation that's causing climate change, the injustices in the world.
If I can jump in real quick. Oh, please go ahead.
I thought the book was really interesting to read, but presents a very anti-technology view of our situation, makes some assumptions that just can't really be proved. For instance, energy use is not the only cause of population increase. There may be a correlation, but you can't establish that it's the actual cause. You know, no more than you can say that longevity improved from 1800 when people lived to be in their 40s, and now they live to be, you know, in their 80s. Is that energy use too? Well, in fact, it probably is somewhat energy use. The poorest countries that have the least electricity use, for instance, have the lowest longevity. They also have the highest birth rates, by the way. And remember what happened when the lights went out in New York? The birth rates went up. So, you know, we have to be careful what we assume is true. Are we wasteful in this country? Yeah, we have an old infrastructure. Today, a house that's built right here, 2014, is going to be 75% less energy consumptive than one that was built 25 years ago. And unfortunately, we have a lot of old houses, you know. Our country wasn't destroyed in war. So we have to we have to refit, you know. And in the meantime, all those old places are going to be wasteful. We use California as an example of, you know, what they could do. Yep. However, their largest electric utility, PG&E, went bankrupt. So, yeah, they could control things, but can they control them well enough to maintain a primary industry that's absolutely critical to our health, our safety, etc.? No, they couldn't do it. You know, changing the energy regime is going to take maybe parts of centuries. You know, it's not going to happen in a decade or two. You mentioned risk. When is there no risk in any undertaking? Never. If you want to wait till there's no risk, you'll never do anything. So I think you have to accept some risk. they talked about deindustrialization. You know, that going backwards was tried once after the Roman Empire. We call that the Dark Ages. You know, we're going to give up a lot if we have to go that way. I get a few more notes here.
I'm sure it has to be a use of everything together. I think there'll have to be an amalgamation of, as I say, the good from now, what we can figure out for the future, and what we can say from the past.
Let me just finish what I wanted to say, if you want. I like the way you organized the ROIE or EORII, the energy return on investment. But, you know, an important part here is greenness. We have a global problem with CO2 and methane, and, you know, we need to put a priority on those technologies that are greenest. Now, which technology is green, has a small footprint, and can provide base load electricity for our homes and our factories? Which one is that?
Is there any one that can do that, or is it all of the above?
Yeah, there is one.
What do you think it is?
Nuclear. It's the only one that can provide it.
And what do you do with the waste?
What do you do? Well, you do what the French do. You reprocess the fuel rods, and you take out the 85 to 90% of fissionable uranium that's still in them, and you bring it up to a higher level, so you can put it back in the reactor, and you keep reusing the fuel rods until you consume all of the uranium, and the amount of radioactive waste is much smaller. So they have a waste repository in France where they, you know, they put the waste. Now they know they're going to keep it, some of it, for 100,000 years. But it's not the vast quantities that we're producing, because we don't reprocess the fuel rods. We have a political problem, not a technical problem, with nuclear waste. We also have that huge facility in Nevada that we spent $25 billion. The politicians were all for it while we were spending money in their state, but now that it's close to completion, they're all against it. You know, so, you know, we can do things differently. We have a system that's difficult to change and to move in the right direction. Those are my comments. I really enjoyed the book. There's a lot of good stuff.
Did you have a
but I
chance to
wish
read
they
the whole
would have.
thing?
Oh yeah, twice.
Yep.
But I wish they would have provided a more balanced view, and so that you could see that both arguments about this idea of going back 200 years to pre-industrial times, that's not going to work. I mean, it's not practical. It's never going to happen.
I agree that the cat's pretty much out of the bag. There's no way to completely go back, but I think there's definitely something to learning from the lessons from the past. We had a speaker that we hosted through the Applied Sustainability Center. His name is Chuck Marone, with a nonprofit called Strong Towns. And so his background as a simple engineer is working with cities and how cities are designed. And so he was definitely in his lecture talking about how the ways in which cities were designed in the past was very close together. You're able to walk everywhere, and it's just careful planning. We don't have the sprawl like we see now. It's only been in the past 50 years that we've seen our cities and our highways really expand. So in that way, we do need to go back and sort of redesign the ways in which we view our cities and how we plan our cities in order to use less energy, because there is a lot of energy being wasted just driving.